everybody, it's Jenny from the Missouri Star Quilt Company, and take a look at this quilt behind me. Isn't this fun? If any of you know me at all, you know that the Dresden was my nemesis quilt. I just thought I could never make a Dresden. And once I learned I could make a Dresden, I really became obsessed. You guys will have to search the videos, and on our app we have a search bar. You can search Dresden quilts, because literally for a while there I have like a Dresden Christmas tree and a turkey and I just did Dresden everything, wall hanging. Oh, I'm telling you, I love Dresdens. Anyway, I love the look of this. This is a half Dresden. It's set on a black block, so it looks like the sun is rising. Love sunrises and sunsets, and we're calling this Here Comes the Sun. So to make this quilt, what you're going to need is one packet of 10-inch squares, and we have used Lava Batik Solid Sunset. How perfect is that? That's by Anthology Fabrics. We set these little half Dresdens on big 14-inch squares. And so you're going to need 5.5 yards of this black background. We also did not do a border on this. We just did a little binding out here, 3/4 of a yard for a binding. Our back is just plain black, but you're going to need 2.5 yards of a 108 fabric on that. But take a look we stitched this with orange thread. It's so pretty. Let me get this little fluff off of here. There we go. Isn't that beautiful stitching? I hope you guys can see that. It's really, really pretty. So let me show you how to make this block, because it's a lot of fun and it's super easy. And once you learn how to make a Dresden, I'm pretty sure you're going to be addicted too. So what we're going to need is this Dresden template. Now ours is made for the pre-cut, so it goes all the way up to 10 inches, but we're going to be cutting our blades at the 5-inch mark. So what we want to do is we want to take our 10-inch squares and we want to cut them in half so that we have two 5 by 10-inch rectangles. And then if you do that, you get one extra blade out of it. Now you're not going to use all this fabric to make this quilt, but you'll use a good amount. So let me show you how we're going to cut these. We're going to cut them like this. So you take your blade and you're going to put it on your strip, your 5-inch strip, and we're going to slide it all the way over to the edge as far as we can get it. And we're going to cut one right here like this. And then we're going to cut it on the other side as well, like this. Okay, so that gives you your blade, and it takes this edge off. So now you're going to be cutting only one side. You're going to flip your template around like this and cut the other one, and flip it around and cut the next one. So it becomes very easy to cut these. Now, if I were doing these and I didn't already know that I had some made, I would probably stack up 4 or 5 of these pieces. So you're cutting a whole bunch of blades at once. For each block, you're going to need 14 blades. And let me count to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I take that back. 10 blades for each block, and there's 42 blocks. So just keep that in mind. So we're cutting our blades out like this, and then let me show you how easy it is to make a Dresden blade. Oh, I can get one more. Wait, I can't go on. I have to do this one more. Here we go. So I'm going to put this on here, and I'm going to cut off this little edge right over here. There we go. So see, that's pretty good for waist, 2 little tiny pieces. All right, so now what we're going to do to make a Dresden blade is we're going to fold this right in half like this. Now these batiks, a lot of them don't have wrong sides. So it doesn't really matter what side you're going to use, but you're going to fold it in half like this, and I just finger press it so it'll lay down nice and straight. And then I'm going to sew 1/4 inch right across the top right there. So let's go do that. All right, so I'm going to set my presser foot on the edge, and we're just going to sew 1/4 inch straight across. All right, so now this is what we have right here. And what I'm going to do is you can take your blade or a little pair of scissors, and I'm just going to nip off that corner like that. All that does is help it to turn easier so that it'll lay flatter. Now we're just going to flip this in, and to do that I stick my thumb in here, pull my seam so it's all on one side, and then I just push it through like that. And there is your little Dresden blade right there. Look how cool that is. Just one seam and you get that little blade. All right, so let's press this down, because we're going to start sewing these together. Now I like to sew them in groups of 4s like this. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I need to add a couple more. So I'm going to take the one I just made, and I'm going to actually get a little pin and poke this little point up so it goes up a little better. There we go. And then I'm going to sew these two together. Now what you're watching for when you sew the blades together is you want this part up here to match right here. We don't care what's happening down here because we're going to cover this with a circle. But these two little blades right here, we want to watch to make sure they're lined up. And then we're just going to start right here and sew straight down, 1/4 inch. All right, here we go. And I'm going to back stitch this because I don't want this to come apart. This is one of those times where it's good to take a few extra little stitches in there so it comes right apart. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this open. And I'm going to sew these together. Now let's look and see what makes the pretty layout here. And I think that's going to be pretty. So I'm going to sew this 4 to these 4 like this. Again, do a little back stitch. For those of you who don't know the sewing lingo, a back stitch is just where you should have a button on your machine that causes it to sew in reverse. So you're going to sew forward a couple of stitches and back a couple of stitches. And then that just like, it will keep the seam from coming apart and being kind of fragile at that point. All right, now I am lining this one up and sewing it from the bottom up. It doesn't make any difference. I just wanted you to know you don't have to do it this way. But I've lined up my top edges so they match perfectly still. All right, hang on, here we go. Okay, now we are ready to press this open. And I'm just going to iron this out. Let me move these things for you so you can see this ironing. I like to kind of press so that my seams all go one direction. It doesn't really matter because we're not sewing it up to anything, so it won't really matter. All right, so my background square, how I come up with the size of my background square is that when you make a plate, a Dresden plate, which is a whole full circle, when you make one of those circles, it's generally about 12 inches. And so I made this block 14 so that I would have a little bit of room on either side of my Dresden plate. Now let me trim off these threads right here. I got a little scissor right here. I can trim them off. Let me see here. And even the trimming doesn't matter because we're going to cover that up with a circle, but it just makes it neater. All right, so we got those threads clipped off, and we're going to lay this at the very bottom of our block. Now right here, you see we don't have to turn these edges under because it's going to go in the seam. So I'm going to put some pins on here like this, and I'm going to show you actually 2 ways to sew this down, because I love to have stuff to do, hand stuff to do when I'm in the car. And I love to sew my Dresdens on when I'm driving along because it's mindless, it keeps my hands busy, and if my hands are busy, then I'm not reaching in the snack bag, you know. So I have a plan for this. So I pinned it on like this, and now we have to think about the circle. Now there's lots of ways to make circles. And we only really need a half circle for this one. But I decided it would be easiest to use interfacing right here. And we've used this. Let me show you this over here. This is a heat and bond iron-on fusible. And it's a, let me make sure I have it say it right. It's feather weight iron-on fusible interfacing. And there'll be a link for that in there so you can go get it. But what it is if you feel it, it's bumpy on one side and really smooth on the other. The bumpy side we want to put toward the right side of our fabric. And again, on a batik, it's hard to tell, you know, what's the back side. But I put it toward the front side that you're going to want to show. Then we're going to sew 1/4 inch all the way around. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to set this up and set my presser foot right along the edge of my circle. And we're just going to sew right around the edge. Now this is a 4.5-inch circle. I should talk about that for a minute, because when you make a Dresden, depending upon what you're making, you'll have that circle size in your head already. And I literally will search my house for the perfect coffee cup or vase or something like that that is just going to be the perfect size circle, and I will trace that on a piece of cardboard and use that as my template. We're including a template for you, so that's an easy way to do that. But generally what I do is I look for something that is the size of the circle that I want, and I'll trace that. All right. So now I have this, and what we're going to do is we're going to cut this in half because we're only using half our circle. And so this is set up here. My half mark is going to be right here. These are 4.5-inch circles that I'm using. I don't remember if I told you that, but they're 4.5-inch circles, but really your circle could be just about any size. Now, an old sewing tip, whenever you're sewing on a curve, if you clip it a few times, don't cut through your stitch line, but clip it a few times, and trim it close to the stitch line, your piece will turn a lot easier. It's hard for me to talk and cut these little these little things. All right, let me just trim this just a little bit closer. All right, so then we're going to flip it right side out, just like this. And this is going to give us a nice clean edge, a nice round edge for our circle. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure this edge is nice and round, and we're going to want to finger press it. If you press it with the iron, this is going to be stuck to your ironing board, because remember those little dots were on the inside there. So then this circle is going to go right here. Now you can touch it with the iron and it'll stay there. You don't have to pin it or anything. All right, so let's talk about how we sew these on. So this one right here is done with a button stitch on the sewing machine. It looks great. It looks fine. I like the look of it. A lot of people like to use accent stitching on their edges. And this is just that little applique stitch that's on most machines. And I would get some practice fabric and try that stitch out and see if you like it. But I want to show you how to hand sew it on for those of you who want work in the car. So let me go ahead and press this little circle on right here. And I'm just going to iron this and hold it for a few seconds so that it just kind of sticks on there. And I want to show you how easy this is to stitch these on. A lot of people think that when they're sewing a Dresden on, they're appliquing. And you can applique. That didn't stick on as well as I wanted. I probably didn't hold it long enough. You can applique, but when you applique, your stitches are pretty close together. And so I learned a long time ago that when I sew Dresdens on, basically I'm going to be quilting right over the top of these Dresdens. So my stitches don't have to be tiny or close or careful. They just have to hold that blade on till it gets to the quilters. So basically what I do, this is called a ladder stitch, and I'm just going to come up this edge right here, and I'm going to try to get this so you guys can see it really well. I'm going to bring my needle up, and I'm going to come right through the fold. See how I'm coming right through the fold? Like this. And then I'm going to go straight back down into that hole, and then I'm going to come up about 1/4 inch away. I know you're gasping because it's so far away, but really all it has to do is hold this on. So again, we go straight back down in that hole and then come up 1/4 inch still in that fold. And that's all that is. Just like this. Now you want to make sure that you use thread that's going to match your top piece. If you use thread that's going to match your top piece, it won't show too much. If you use thread that's your background color, it's going to show terrible. So now I'm at the point, and I'm just going to come back down the other side, and I'm just going to keep doing the same thing. And I'm just going to go in where I came out and come back up about 1/4 inch. And that is a ladder stitch. That's the stitch I use for binding. I use it for all kinds of things. So go right back in and come back up. See, we're coming right out the fold. And I'm doing pretty good, even because I'm not even wearing my glasses. Look at that. Now, if I would probably have picked a yellow thread for this, but I didn't think about that. But this gray is actually working. Gray is a really good universal thread. But be sure and match your thread to the color, your top piece. Remember that. That's the key. You match it to your top piece. And if your top piece is all different colors, then you're just going to lay some of the threads, some of the colors across the top, and look at the one that disappears. And that will be the key for you for knowing which one's going to blend the best with all of them. All right, so we're back up here to the point, and I'm just going to go around and do that. And I love having something to do, something for my hands to do when I'm watching television at night or when I'm driving in the car. So this is just one of those great projects if you want to make a Dresden quilt that just, you know, you don't have to finish tomorrow, but you just want to take some time with and sew together. So once you get your blocks done, literally we just sewed our blocks together in rows like this. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks across, 7 blocks down. Makes a great quilt. It's 81 by 94. And it's just a really fun look for it. I love that we use the black on the background. It makes the suns just pop. I love that we chose an orange thread for the stitch color, because then you just get to see that beautiful pattern. This has been a really fun quilt to design and make, and we hope you enjoyed Here Comes the Sun from the Missouri Star Quilt Company.